The night shift begins. The rain poured down in thick sheets across the Seattle streets as Ruby Patterson pushed her old metal cart through the narrow alley. Her worn sneakers splashed through puddles, and her jacket was soaked through, but she kept moving. This was her life, her routine, her survival. Every night for the past 5 years, she had walked these same streets, collecting recyclable materials that others threw away. Bottles, cans, cardboard, anything that could be sold to the recycling center for a few dollars. Ruby was not ashamed of her work. Her mother had taught her that honest work was nothing to hide from. After her mother passed away 3 years ago, Ruby continued this job because it paid enough to keep a roof over her head and food in her stomach. She lived alone in a tiny studio apartment on the edge of the city, where rent was cheap and neighbors minded their own business. Tonight felt different somehow. The air was heavier, the rain colder, and Ruby felt an unusual sense of anticipation in her chest. She shook off the feeling and continued pushing her cart toward the commercial district, where restaurants and offices threw away the best recyclables an unusual find as. Ruby turned the corner near a fancy restaurant called the Pearl. She nearly dropped her cart. There, slumped against a dumpster between torn garbage bags and broken boxes, was a man. He was wearing an expensive suit, the kind Ruby had only seen in magazine advertisements, even soaked with rain and stained with mud. The fabric looked luxurious. The man was unconscious, his head tilted to one side, rain streaming down his face. One side of his forehead had a nasty cut that was bleeding slowly, mixing with the rainwater. His dark hair was plastered to his head, and his breathing was shallow and uneven. Ruby's first instinct was to walk away. The streets were dangerous at night, and getting involved with strangers could mean trouble. She had heard too many stories about people being robbed or worse when they tried to help someone. But something made her stop. Maybe it was the way his hand was loosely curled, as if reaching for something. Maybe it was the expensive watch on his wrist that nobody had stolen yet. Or maybe it was simply the memory of her mother's voice saying, "Ruby, never walk past someone who needs help." A difficult decision, Ruby set down her cart and cautiously approached the man. Her heart pounded in her chest. She knelt beside him, careful not to touch him yet. Up close, she could smell the strong scent of alcohol mixed with expensive cologne. He was definitely drunk, but the head wound suggested something more had happened. "Hey," Mr. Ruby said loudly, hoping he would wake up. "Can you hear me?" No response. She gently shook his shoulder. Still nothing. Ruby checked his pulse at his neck. It was there, steady but weak. She looked around the empty alley. No one was coming. No police cars, no late-night walkers. It's just the sound of rain hitting pavement. Ruby thought about calling an ambulance, but she knew how that would go. They would come, take him away, and maybe bill him thousands of dollars. And what if he did not have insurance? What if he woke up in a hospital with massive debt? Plus, Ruby did not have a phone. She had sold it months ago to pay rent. She made a decision that would change both their lives forever. She would take him home. Taking him home, getting a full-grown man onto her recycling cart, was harder than Ruby expected. She cleared off the bags and bottles, setting them aside to collect later. Then, using all her strength, she managed to lift and drag the man onto the cart. He was heavy, probably weighing close to 200 pounds. Her arms shook with effort and sweat mixed with rain on her forehead. "Please do not wake up yet," Ruby muttered, as she positioned him as comfortably as possible on the cart. This would be really hard to explain. The journey back to her apartment took twice as long as usual. Ruby had to stop several times to rest her arms and catch her breath. A few times people walking by gave her strange looks, but nobody stopped to ask questions. In this part of the city, people learned not to ask too many questions. Finally, after what felt like hours, Ruby reached her apartment building. It was an old structure with peeling paint and a broken elevator. She lived on the second floor, which meant dragging the man up a flight of stairs. By the time she got him inside her apartment and onto her bed, Ruby's entire body ached. The morning after, Ruby did not sleep that night. She sat on her only chair, watching the stranger breathe. She had cleaned the wound on his forehead with warm water and covered it with a bandage from her small first aid kit. She had also managed to remove his wet jacket and shoes, covering him with her only blanket. As dawn light began filtering through her small window, the man stirred. His eyes fluttered open slowly, revealing bright green eyes that looked confused and disoriented. He sat up quickly, then immediately grabbed his head and groaned in pain. "Easy," Ruby said softly, standing up. "You hit your head pretty hard." The man looked around her small apartment with growing confusion. His eyes took in the cracked walls, the single light bulb hanging from the ceiling, the tiny kitchen area with its old stove, and finally Ruby herself. "Where am I?" His voice was rough, scratchy from alcohol and sleep. "My apartment," Ruby answered simply. "I found you last night in an alley. You were unconscious and hurt. I brought you here." The man touched his forehead gingerly, feeling the bandage. He looked down at himself, noticing his expensive clothes, now wrinkled and dirty. Then he looked back at Ruby, and something changed in his expression. Fear, maybe, or confusion? "Who am I?" he whispered. Ruby frowned. "What do you mean? You do not remember your name?" The man closed his eyes tightly, as if trying to pull memories from somewhere deep inside. After a long moment, he opened them again, and Ruby saw genuine panic there. "I do not remember anything," he said, his voice shaking. "Not my name, not where I live, not how I ended up in that alley. Everything before waking up here is just blank." A temporary name. Ruby sat back down, processing this information. She had heard of amnesia before, usually from movies, but never thought it was real. Looking at the genuine fear and confusion on the man's face, she believed him. "Okay," she said calmly, though her mind was racing. "Let me try to help. Do you remember anything at all? Any images or feelings?" The man concentrated hard. "I see flashes, bright lights, people talking very loudly, someone yelling, but I cannot make sense of it. It is like trying to remember a dream." Ruby nodded. "Maybe it will come back slowly. Sometimes injuries affect memory. You have a pretty bad cut on your forehead. Did you say you found me in an alley?" "Yes, near the Pearl restaurant. You were lying among trash bags, completely passed out. You smelled strongly of alcohol, so I think you had been drinking a lot." The man looked embarrassed. "I am sorry you had to deal with that, and thank you for helping me. You could have just left me there or called the police." "I thought about it," Ruby admitted honestly, "but something told me to help you instead." They sat in silence for a moment. Then the man looked at her directly. "You said this is your apartment. It is very small. And you mentioned finding me while you were working?" Ruby felt a flash of defensiveness, but pushed it down. "I collect recyclables. Bottles, cans, cardboard. I sell them to recycling centers. It is honest work." "I was not judging," the man said quickly. "I just meant that you clearly do not have much, yet you brought a complete stranger into your home and helped him. That is incredibly kind." Ruby felt her cheeks warm at the compliment. "My mom always said to help people when you can. I guess her lesson stuck with me." "Your mother sounds like she was a wonderful person." She was. Another silence fell between them, but this one felt more comfortable. Finally, Ruby stood up. "We need to call you something until you remember your real name. I cannot just keep saying, 'Hey, you.'" The man almost smiled. "That is fair. What do you suggest?" Ruby thought for a moment, looking at his face. Despite the bruising and the cut, he was handsome. Strong jaw, those striking green eyes, dark hair that probably looked good when it was not messy and dirty. He looked like he belonged in a movie, not in her shabby apartment. "How about James?" she suggested. "It is a simple name. Easy to remember." "James," he repeated, testing it out. "Okay, James it is. And what is your name?" "Ruby. Ruby Patterson." "Ruby," said her name softly, and something about the way he said it made her heart skip. "Thank you, Ruby, for saving my life. I do not know what I would have done if you had not found me." Building trust, Ruby made them breakfast with what little she had in her kitchen. 2 eggs split between them, and some bread that was a day old, but still good for toasting. As they ate at her small table, Ruby found herself studying James more carefully. His hands were clean despite the dirt on his clothes. His nails were perfectly trimmed. His teeth were straight and white, suggesting good dental care. Everything about him suggested wealth and privilege, yet here he was, eating plain scrambled eggs in a tiny apartment like it was the best meal he had ever had. "This is delicious," James said, and he sounded like he meant it. "It is just eggs and toast," Ruby laughed. "Maybe so, but it is the first meal I remember having, so it is special." They talked for hours that morning. Ruby told James about her life, about growing up with her mother in Seattle, about starting the recycling work after her mother got sick and could not work anymore. She told him about the small community of people who did similar work, how they looked out for each other. Shared information about good spots to find recyclables. James listened intently to every word, asking questions, seeming genuinely interested. When it was his turn to talk, he could not say much about his past, but he shared his thoughts and feelings in the present moment. He talked about how strange it felt to have no memories, like being a newborn baby in an adult body. He talked about how grateful he was to Ruby, how safe he felt in her presence, despite knowing nothing about her. As the morning turned to afternoon, Ruby realized she needed to go out and retrieve her cart and the recyclables she had left behind last night. She also needed to make her usual rounds before the good stuff got picked over by others. "Need to go to work," Ruby said, standing up and stretching. "You should probably rest here. That head injury needs time to heal." James stood up too. "Can I come with you?" Ruby looked at him in surprise. "To collect trash? In those clothes?" James looked down at his expensive suit, now rumpled and stained. "I cannot just sit here doing nothing while you work. You have already done so much for me. Let me help, even if I am not very good at it. Please." Ruby saw the earnestness in his eyes and found herself nodding. "Okay, but we need to find you different clothes. That suit will attract too much attention." She rummaged through a box of old clothes she had collected from donation bins. Finding a pair of jeans and a simple t-shirt that looked like they might fit James, they were not fancy, but they were clean and functional. After James changed, they headed out together. Ruby pushed her cart through the familiar streets, while James walked beside her, asking questions about everything. How did she know which materials were worth collecting? How much could she make in a day? What was the best time to find good recyclables? As they worked side by side, something unexpected happened. Ruby found herself enjoying his company. James had a way of making even the mundane task of sorting through trash seem interesting. He made jokes, asked thoughtful questions, and genuinely tried to help even though he clearly had no experience with this kind of work. By the time evening came and they headed back to Ruby's apartment with a cart full of materials, Ruby realized that her life had just become much more complicated. She had a stranger with no memory living in her tiny apartment, wearing borrowed clothes, and helping her collect recyclables. It was absurd. It was inconvenient. It was potentially dangerous. But as she glanced at James, who was smiling, despite being tired and dirty from the day's work, Ruby realized something else. For the first time in 3 years since her mother died, she did not feel alone. And that feeling, dangerous as it might be, was worth more than any amount of recyclables she could collect. Learning a new life, 2 weeks passed, and James had become part of Ruby's daily routine. Every morning, they woke early, shared a simple breakfast, and headed out to collect recyclables. James learned quickly, discovering the best spots to find aluminum cans, which paid the most. He learned how to spot valuable cardboard boxes, and which plastics were worth keeping. Ruby watched him transform from a confused, injured man into someone who genuinely enjoyed the work. His hands, which had been soft and unused to labor, developed small calluses. His face, once pale, gained color from being outdoors. He never complained about the long hours, the heavy lifting, or the smell of garbage. What surprised Ruby most was how happy James seemed. Despite having no memory of his past, despite living in poverty compared to what his expensive clothes suggested he was used to, he smiled more than anyone Ruby had ever known. He found joy in small things. A particularly good haul of bottles, a sunny afternoon, a decent meal they cooked together, Ruby James said one evening as they sorted through their collection. "I know this sounds strange, but I feel like this is the first time I've been truly content. Does that make sense?" Ruby looked up from the pile of cans she was counting. "Maybe your old life was not as good as it seemed. Money does not always mean happiness. You're probably right, James agreed, setting aside a stack of flattened cardboard. Whatever I was before, I like who I am now. I like working with my hands. I like knowing that what we collect helps the environment. I like this simple life. Ruby felt her heart warm at his words, but a small voice in her mind whispered a warning. What would happen when his memory returned? Would he still feel the same way about this life, about her? Falling in love as the days turned into weeks, Ruby found herself falling for James. It happened gradually in small moments. The way he always gave her the bigger portion of food, how he sang silly songs while they worked to make her laugh, the thoughtful questions he asked about her mother, her dreams, her life. One Saturday afternoon, they took a rare day off and walked to the Seattle waterfront. They sat on a bench overlooking the bay, sharing a single ice cream cone because it was all they could afford. "Tell me about your dreams, Ruby," James said, handing her the cone. "If you could do anything with your life, what would it be?" Ruby thought carefully before answering. "I would want to help people like me. People who work hard but barely get by. Maybe create a program that helps recycling workers get better prices for their materials. Or provides them with better equipment. Something that shows the world our work matters." James listened intently, his green eyes focused on her face. "That is a beautiful dream." "You have such a good heart, Ruby. What about you?" Ruby asked. "What do you think you would want if you could remember?" James was quiet for a long moment, watching the boats on the water. "Honestly, I think I want to be right here with you, doing exactly what we are doing now. I cannot imagine wanting anything more than this."
How?
Ruby felt tears prick her eyes. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe this could last. But deep down, she knew that eventually his past would catch up with them. That night, as they lay in the darkness of her small apartment, James insisted on sleeping on the floor while Ruby took the bed. Ruby whispered into the silence, "James?" "Yes, thank you for being here. These past few weeks have been the happiest I have had in a long time." She heard him shift on the floor. "Ruby, I need to tell you something." Her heart started beating faster. "What is it?" "I think I am falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between them. Ruby's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to say it back, but fear held her tongue. What if tomorrow he remembered everything and left? "You do not have to say anything," James continued softly. "I just needed you to know. Whatever happens, whether my memory comes back or not, these feelings are real. You are the most incredible person I have ever known, at least that I can remember." Ruby climbed down from the bed and found him in the darkness. She reached for his hand. "I am falling for you too, James. But I am scared." "Of what?" "Of losing you when you remember who you really are." James squeezed her hand. "Then we will just have to make every moment count until then." They fell asleep that night holding hands, both knowing that their happiness was borrowed time, but choosing to embrace it anyway. Flash of memory. The first major memory fragment hit James a week later. They were at a coffee shop where Ruby sometimes collected used cups and newspapers. As they walked past the business section, James suddenly stopped and stared at a newspaper on a table. His face went pale. His hands started shaking. "James?" Ruby touched his arm. "What is wrong?" "I know this building," he whispered, pointing at a photograph in the newspaper. It showed a modern glass skyscraper downtown. "I have been there. I worked there, I think. Or owned it. I cannot tell exactly, but I know that place." Ruby's stomach dropped. "What else do you remember?" James closed his eyes, concentrating hard. "Meetings. So many meetings. People in suits, talking about numbers, graphs, money, stress. So much stress pressing down on me like I could not breathe. And anger. I was angry at someone about something important. Maybe we should go there," Ruby suggested, though every part of her wanted to run in the opposite direction. "Maybe seeing it in person will help you remember more." But James shook his head firmly. "No, not yet. I am not ready to face whatever that life was. I need more time here, with you being James." Ruby wanted to feel relieved, but instead she felt guilty. Was she being selfish, wanting to keep him in ignorance? just to hold on to this happiness a little longer? Over the next few days, more memories came in flashes. James would suddenly remember a face, a conversation, a feeling. The memories were not complete enough to tell him who he was, but they painted a picture of a life filled with pressure, expectations, and loneliness. "I do not think I was happy before," James told Ruby one night. "Every memory that comes back feels heavy, like carrying rocks on my shoulders. But here with you, I feel light, free." The truth revealed, everything changed on a rainy Tuesday morning. Ruby and James were sorting recyclables in the alley behind their usual restaurant when a black luxury car pulled up. A man in an expensive suit stepped out, holding an umbrella. "Dylan," the man shouted, staring at James in shock. "Dylan Westbrook. Where have you been?" "We have been searching for you for over a month." James, or Dylan as the man called him, stood frozen. Ruby felt her world tilting. The man rushed forward. "Do you have any idea what has been happening?" "The company is in chaos. The board of directors wants to remove you. Your investors are threatening to pull out. Your cousin has been trying to take over everything." At the word cousin, something clicked in James's head. Ruby saw his expression change, saw recognition flood into his eyes. She watched as weeks of peaceful contentment shattered like glass. "Trevor," James said slowly, the name coming from somewhere deep in his recovered memory. "Trevor Morrison." "Yes, it is me, your assistant," the man said with relief. "Thank goodness you remember. We need to get you to the hospital immediately and then to the office. Everything is falling apart without you." More memories crashed into James like waves. His name was Dylan Westbrook. He was the founder and CEO of Westbrook Technologies, a company worth hundreds of millions of dollars. He remembered the night he lost his memory, the fight with his cousin Brandon who wanted to push him out of the company. He remembered drinking to cope with the stress, stumbling out of a bar. And then nothing until waking up in Ruby's apartment. Dylan turned to look at Ruby, and she saw the moment everything changed. He was no longer James, the man who collected recyclables and sang silly songs. He was Dylan Westbrook, a billionaire who lived in a completely different world. "Ruby," he said, his voice breaking. I remember everything." The painful goodbye, Trevor looked between them, his eyes widening as he took in Ruby's worn clothes and simple appearance. "Wait, have you been staying with this woman?" "Sir, we need to have you checked by a doctor immediately. Who knows what could have happened?" Ruby felt anger flash through her at Trevor's tone, but Dylan held up his hand. "Trevor, give us a moment alone, please." Trevor looked like he wanted to argue, but nodded and returned to the car. Dylan turned to Ruby, and she could see the pain in his eyes. "I have to go," he said quietly. "I have responsibilities. Hundreds of employees depending on me. Investors who have put their trust in my company. I cannot just walk away from that." Ruby nodded, trying to keep her voice steady. "I know, I always knew this day would come. Ruby, please understand. The past month with you has been the most real, most genuine time of my life. But I have obligations." "Obligations," Ruby repeated flatly. "Right, back to your real life. Your important life. Not this pretend poverty vacation you have been on." "That is not fair," Dylan said, reaching for her hand. Ruby pulled away. "Is it not? You gotta play at being poor for a few weeks. Gotta feel good about yourself for doing honest work. But now reality calls, and you are running right back to your glass towers and fancy cars. It is not like that." "Then what is it like, Dylan?" Ruby's voice cracked on his real name. "Because from where I am standing, I was just a convenient place to stay, while you figured out who you were. A charity case that made you feel noble." "You know, that is not true," Dylan said desperately. "I love you, Ruby. That has not changed, just because I remember my past. Love." Ruby laughed bitterly. "You do not even know me. You knew James, some imaginary person who does not exist. Dylan Westbrook, billionaire CEO, does not fall in love with trash collectors. Do not say that. Do not diminish what we had Ruby emphasized. Past tense. Because it is over now. Go back to your life, Dylan. I am sure you will forget all about this strange little adventure soon enough." Dylan looked like she had slapped him. "I will come back. I will fix things with the company, and then I will come back, and we can figure this out together. Ruby turned away, unable to look at his face anymore. Do not bother. I do not need charity or pity from a millionaire with a guilty conscience. Just go, Ruby, please. Go. Ruby's voice echoed in the alley. Just go back to where you belong. Trevor called from the car saying something about an emergency board meeting. Dylan stood there for another moment, torn between two worlds. Then, with one last look at Ruby, he walked to the car and got in. Ruby watched the black car drive away, taking with it the man she had fallen in love with. She stood in the rain, among the recyclables they had collected together, and let herself cry for the first time since her mother died, Ruby's. Heartbreak, the days after Dylan left were the hardest of Ruby's life. She went back to her routine, collecting recyclables alone, but everything reminded her of him. The spot where he had first learned to sort aluminum cans. The restaurant where they had shared jokes while collecting cardboard. The bench by the waterfront where they had shared ice cream. Her small apartment felt even smaller and emptier now. She could still see the spot on the floor where he had slept, still smelled the faint scent of his borrowed clothes in her closet. At night, she reached across the darkness for a hand that was not there anymore. Ruby threw herself into work, collecting more materials than ever before, pushing herself to exhaustion so she would not have to think or feel. Her fellow collectors noticed the change in her, but did not ask questions. Everyone had their own pain to carry. 1 week after Dylan left, Ruby saw his face on the news at an electronics store window. He was giving a press conference about returning to his company looking polished and professional in an expensive suit. The man on that screen bore no resemblance to James, the person who had laughed with her and held her hand in the darkness. Good for you, Dylan Westbrook, Ruby whispered to the screen. I hope your real life makes you happy. She turned to walk away, determined to forget him and move on with her life. But fate had other plans. Unexpected return 3 weeks after Dylan left. Ruby was working her usual route when a familiar black car pulled up beside her. Her heart started racing before she even saw who was inside. Dylan stepped out, but he looked different, tired, with dark circles under his eyes. His expensive suit seemed to hang on him a bit, like he had lost weight. He walked toward her carefully, like approaching a wild animal that might run away. Ruby, he said, please just give me 5 minutes to explain. Ruby wanted to refuse, wanted to protect her heart from more pain, but something in his expression made her pause. 5 minutes, she agreed. Then you leave and never come back. Dylan nodded. Fair enough. Ruby, I am sorry for how I left things. You were right to be angry. I did run back to my old life without thinking about what that meant for us. But these past 3 weeks have been torture. I have been trying to fix things, to set up a life where I can be with you. Be with me. Ruby shook her head. Dylan, we live in different worlds. You have board meetings and investors. I collect trash for a living. How exactly do you think that works? I have a proposition for you, Dylan said. Come work for me. Not as a charity case or a pity hire, but as a real employee. I have been reviewing how my company handles recycling and waste management, and it is terrible. I need someone who understands this industry from the ground up to help me build a better program.
Ow.
Ruby stared at him. You want me to work for you? I want to give you a chance to make your dream real. You told me you wanted to help people like yourself, to create programs that support recycling workers. Let me give you the resources to do that. Come to my company, see what I am building, and if you do not like it, you can walk away. No strings attached. Ruby's mind raced. Part of her wanted to say no, to protect herself from potential heartbreak. But another part, the part that still remembered how to dream, whispered that maybe this was her chance to actually make a difference. 5 minutes is up, Ruby said, but I will think about your offer. Give me a week to decide. Dylan smiled for the first time since arriving, that same genuine smile that had made her fall for him. Take all the time you need. I will wait as long as it takes. A business proposal 1 week later, Ruby stood outside the glass tower she had seen in Dylan's memory flash. The building stretched toward the sky, all gleaming windows and modern architecture. Everything about it screamed wealth and power, so different from her world of alleys and recycling carts. She almost turned around 3 times before finally walking through the revolving doors. The lobby was enormous, with marble floors and a ceiling that seemed impossibly high. People in business suits walked past with purpose, carrying briefcases and talking on phones. Ruby felt completely out of place in her clean but simple clothes. Ruby Patterson, a professional-looking woman, approached with a smile. "I am Jennifer Park, Mr. Westbrook's executive assistant. He is expecting you. Please follow me." They rode an elevator to the top floor, and with every floor they passed, Ruby's nervousness grew. What was she doing here? She did not belong in this world of corporate offices and executive meetings. The elevator doors opened directly into Dylan's office suite. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of Seattle. The office was decorated simply but elegantly. With modern furniture and expensive art on the walls, Dylan stood up from his desk when he saw her, his face lighting up with genuine happiness. "Ruby, thank you for coming. I was not sure you would." "I almost did not," Ruby admitted. "This place is intimidating." Dylan walked around his desk toward her, but stopped at a respectful distance. "I know this is overwhelming, but I want to show you what I have been working on. Will you give me a chance?" For the next hour, Dylan showed Ruby detailed plans for a new division of his company, focused on sustainable recycling programs. He explained how he wanted to create partnerships with individual collectors like Ruby, providing them with better equipment, fair prices for materials, and even benefits like health care. "This is your dream, Ruby," Dylan said, pulling up charts and data on his computer. "You told me you wanted to help people in your industry. I am giving you the resources and platform to do exactly that. But I need your expertise. I need someone who has lived this life, who understands the real challenges, to help me build something that actually works." Ruby studied the plans carefully. Despite her lingering hurt and anger, she could not deny that what Dylan was proposing was incredible. This could genuinely help thousands of people who did the same work she did. "What would my role be exactly?" Ruby asked. "Director of Community Outreach and Sustainability," Dylan answered. "You would work directly with recycling collectors, understand their needs, and help design programs that support them. You would have a team, a real salary, and the authority to make decisions about how we run this division."
Ow.
Ruby's head spun. Director, her who had barely finished high school, being given such an important title? "Dylan, I am not qualified for this. I do not have a college degree or business experience." "You have something more valuable than any degree," Dylan said passionately. "You have real experience. You know this world in a way no business school graduate ever could. That is what I need. That is what this program needs to succeed." Ruby walked to the window and looked out at the city below. Somewhere down there were the streets she had walked for years, the alleys where she had collected recyclables, the people who still did what she used to do. This was her chance to actually help them. "Okay," she said finally, turning back to Dylan. "We'll do it. But on one condition, anything. This stays professional. I work for you. You are my boss, and nothing more. I cannot handle mixing business with personal feelings again." Pain flashed across Dylan's face, but he nodded. "If that is what you need, I will respect it. Business only." Facing judgment, Ruby's first month at Westbrook Technologies was both exciting and painful. The work itself was incredible. She got to design programs that would directly help recycling workers. She visited collection sites, talked to people doing the job she used to do, and brought their concerns back to the company. But being around Dylan every day while pretending they were nothing more than boss and employee was torture. Ruby saw the way he looked at her when he thought she was not paying attention. She felt the electricity when their hands accidentally touched during meetings. But she forced herself to maintain professional distance, terrified of getting hurt again. The other executives at the company were less subtle about their opinions. During her second week, Ruby overheard 2 senior managers talking in the break room. "Did you hear how Westbrook hired his new director?" One said, "She is that homeless woman he shacked up with when he had amnesia. Now he has given her a 6-figure job she is completely unqualified for." "Typical," the other responded. "Rich guy has a guilt complex and hands out positions to his charity cases." This sustainability division is going to be a disaster. Ruby felt her face burn with humiliation. But she held her head high and walked past them without acknowledging what she had heard. She would prove them wrong. She would show everyone that she earned her position. The opportunity came sooner than expected. At a major board meeting 2 months into her new job, Ruby presented her first comprehensive recycling partnership program. She had worked on it tirelessly, incorporating feedback from actual recycling workers to create something practical and effective. "This program is unrealistic," said Brandon Westbrook, Dylan's cousin and the biggest opponent to the sustainability division. "You are proposing we pay premium prices for recycled materials when we could source them cheaper through existing contracts. This will cost the company millions." Ruby stood her ground. "It will cost money initially, yes. But the long-term benefits outweigh the costs. We build goodwill in communities, improve our environmental impact scores, and create loyal supply chains with workers who will prioritize quality because we treat them fairly. Plus, consumers increasingly want to support companies with ethical practices. This program will pay for itself within 3 years and increase our market value." Brandon laughed dismissively. "And where did you get your business degree to make these projections?" "Oh, right, you do not have one. You collected trash for a living." The room went silent. Ruby felt every eye on her. This was the moment that would define whether she belonged here or not. "You are right," Ruby said calmly. "I do not have a business degree, but I have something you do not have. I have spent years in the recycling industry, working directly with the people who make your materials collection possible. I know which programs actually work versus which ones sound good in boardrooms but fail in practice. Your current recycling contracts are cheap because they exploit workers who have no other options. My program creates sustainable partnerships built on mutual respect and fair compensation. If you cannot see the value in that, then maybe you should not be making decisions about sustainability." Several board members actually nodded in agreement. Even Brandon looked taken aback by her confident response. Dylan, who had remained silent during the exchange, finally spoke. "Ruby is right. We approved this program precisely because it comes from someone with real expertise. The board will vote on implementing the pilot program as presented." "All in favor?" The majority of hands went up, including some Ruby had thought would oppose her. She had won her first major battle. The sabotage, but Brandon Westbrook was not done fighting. Over the next few weeks, Ruby noticed strange things happening. Documents she needed for meetings would mysteriously disappear from her office. Emails she sent sometimes did not reach their recipients. Appointments with recycling workers would be canceled without her knowledge. At first, Ruby thought she was making mistakes, adjusting poorly to corporate life. But then her assistant, a young woman named Priya, came to her office and closed the door. "Ruby, I need to tell you something," Priya said nervously. "I have been noticing irregularities with your accounts and files. I think someone is deliberately sabotaging your work." Ruby sat forward. "Do you know who?" "I cannot prove it, but I have seen Brandon's assistant, Garrett, accessing your computer after hours. He has administrative access to the system, so technically he is allowed to be there, but the timing is suspicious." Ruby thought quickly. "Can you help me set up monitoring on my accounts? I need proof before I can accuse anyone." Over the next week, Ruby and Priya carefully documented every suspicious activity. They discovered that someone was indeed accessing Ruby's files, modifying data in her reports, and sabotaging her communications. The evidence pointed directly to Garrett, who could only be acting under Brandon's orders. Ruby brought the evidence to Dylan, who was furious. "I will handle Brandon immediately." "This is completely unacceptable," Ruby said. "Let me confront him first. He sees me as weak, as someone who does not belong here. I want to face him myself and prove that I can handle corporate politics just as well as anyone." Dylan looked worried, but respected her wishes. "Okay, but I will be there as backup if you need me." Standing Strong Ruby requested a meeting with Brandon in front of the full executive team. When everyone had gathered in the conference room, she presented her evidence calmly and methodically. "For the past month, someone has been sabotaging my work," Ruby began, displaying the documentation on the screen. Files deleted, emails blocked, Data modified in my reports. The access logs show this was done using administrative credentials belonging to Garrett Mills, Brandon's assistant. Brandon stood up angrily. This is ridiculous. You are accusing my assistant of corporate sabotage without any real proof? Actually, I have plenty of proof, Ruby continued, including surveillance footage of Garrett accessing my office after hours and keystroke logs, showing exactly what files he modified. The question is, was he acting alone or under orders? Garrett, who was present in the meeting, turned pale. Mr. Westbrook told me to monitor Ruby's work for quality control purposes. I did not know it was wrong. Brandon's face went red. Garrett, shut up right now. Mr. Garrett, Dylan said coldly. Are you saying Brandon Westbrook ordered you to interfere with Ruby's work? Garrett looked between Brandon and Dylan, then made his choice. Yes, he said Ruby was going to damage the company with her unrealistic programs, and that we needed to make sure she failed before she cost us too much money. The room erupted in chaos. Brandon tried to deny everything, but the evidence was overwhelming. The board voted immediately to remove Brandon from his position as vice president and launch a full investigation into his activities. As Brandon was escorted from the building, he stopped in front of Ruby. You think you have one? You are just a temporary novelty to Dylan. Once he gets bored of his charity project, you will be gone too. Ruby met his eyes steadily. The difference between us, Brandon, is that I earned my position through hard work and real results. You were born into yours and still could not handle the competition. I am not going anywhere. The grand gesture that night, after everyone else had gone home, Ruby was still in her office finishing paperwork when Dylan knocked on her open door. Working late? He asked with a smile. Could not sleep anyway, Ruby admitted. Too much adrenaline from today? Dylan walked in and sat across from her desk. You were amazing today. The way you handled Brandon, the evidence you gathered, how you stood up for yourself. I was so proud of you. Ruby felt her carefully maintained professional walls starting to crack. Thank you for trusting me to handle it myself. Ruby, Dylan said softly, can we talk? Really talk, not as boss and employee, but as Dylan and Ruby? Ruby's heart started racing. I do not think that is a good idea.
Please.
I have been patient for months, respected your boundaries, kept things professional like you asked. But I cannot do this anymore. I need to tell you how I feel. Dylan, we have been through this. No, we have not. Not really. Dylan stood up and walked around the desk, kneeling beside her chair so they were at eye level. When I left you that day in the alley, I made the biggest mistake of my life. I thought I had to choose between my responsibilities and you, but I was wrong. Ruby, you are not separate from my life. You are the best part of it. These months working with you, watching you excel, seeing you prove every doubter wrong has only made me love you more. Tears filled Ruby's eyes, but we are so different. Your world, my world, they do not fit together. We do not have to fit into existing worlds, Dylan said, taking her hands. We can build our own. Ruby, you have already changed my company for the better. You have shown me what real purpose looks like. And every single day, I fall more in love with the person you are. Smart, brave, compassionate, strong. Please, give us a real chance. Not boss and employee, not rich guy and poor girl, just Dylan and Ruby figuring out life together. Ruby looked into his green eyes, the same eyes that had first opened in her tiny apartment months ago. She thought about all they had been through, the pain and the joy, the challenges and the victories. I am scared, she whispered. I am scared of losing you again. Then do not lose me. Hold on to me as tight as I am holding on to you. Dylan brought her hands to his chest. I love you, Ruby Patterson. I loved you when I was James with no memory and no money. I love you now as Dylan Westbrook with all my responsibilities and wealth. And I will love you tomorrow and every day after that, no matter what challenges we face. Ruby felt the last of her walls crumble. I love you too. I never stopped, even when I was angry and hurt. I never stopped loving you. Dylan smiled, that beautiful, genuine smile that had captured her heart. So is that a yes? Will you give us a real chance? Yes, Ruby laughed through her tears. Yes, Let us build our own world together." Dylan stood and pulled her into his arms, holding her like he would never let go. They stayed like that for a long time, two people from different worlds who had found their way to each other against all odds. Overcoming differences, the next few months were not easy. Ruby and Dylan's relationship faced scrutiny from media, judgment from society, and questions from their own doubts. But they faced it all together. Dylan's high society friends struggled to accept Ruby at first. At charity galas and business dinners, she often felt out of place among people discussing summer homes and luxury vacations. But Ruby refused to pretend to be something she was not. She spoke honestly about her background, her work, and her values. Slowly, her authenticity won people over. "We're refreshing," one wealthy philanthropist told Ruby at a fundraiser. "Everyone here is so busy maintaining appearances. You actually care about making real changes." Ruby's recycling worker friends had their own concerns. Some thought she had sold out, abandoned her roots for money and comfort. But when Ruby brought them to see the programs she had built, showed them the fair wages and benefits Westbrook Technologies now offered to recycling partners, they understood. She had not left them behind. She had found a way to lift them up. Dylan and Ruby decided to live between their two worlds. They kept her small apartment, using it as a reminder of where they came from and what mattered. But they also used Dylan's resources to create more programs helping low-income workers across multiple industries. "My mother always said that good fortune should be shared," Ruby told Dylan as they worked on establishing a new scholarship program for children of recycling workers. "We have been given so much. The least we can do is pass it forward." A new beginning 1 year after Dylan had walked back into Ruby's life, they stood together at the opening ceremony for the Ruby Patterson Center for Sustainable Communities. The center provided resources, training, and support for workers in the recycling and waste management industries. "This does not feel real," Ruby whispered to Dylan as she prepared to give her speech. "A year ago, I was living day to day, barely surviving. Now I am opening a center with my name on it." Dylan squeezed her hand. "You earned every bit of this. You took a chance on a drunk stranger in an alley, and you changed both our lives. Everything that has happened since is because of your kindness, your strength, and your vision." Ruby stepped up to the microphone, looking out at the crowd. She saw former fellow recycling collectors who were now program participants. She saw Dylan's employees who had embraced the sustainability division. She saw community members who believed in what they were building. "A year ago, I found a man who had lost everything," Ruby began. "He had no memory, no identity, no purpose. I took him in not knowing that he would actually be the one to save me. Together, we learned that our differences do not have to divide us. They can strengthen us. Rich or poor, educated or self-taught, privileged or struggling, we all have value to offer each other. This center represents that belief.